All right, everybody, thank you for joining us today. I am super excited about this opportunity. I get to spend some time, really my first real visit with Mr. Doyle Lawson ever. So I'm super excited to be doing this. And if you read the introduction or the blurb about this session, he is absolutely, seeing his band was absolutely the catalyst that led to me wanting to play and wanting to eventually, spend my life pursuing this music. It came from seeing Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver in Dahlonega, Georgia, when I was 9. And I'd like to maybe just start.
You make me feel old, you know that, don't you?
Not at all, not at all. But I want to start maybe talking about that night, though it's just another night for you. It was such a huge transformative thing for me. I can still remember where I was sitting in the crowd with my parents, and maybe we can start by just revisiting that time in your career, because there were a few things about that era of Quicksilver that I think are really special. And please correct me if I'm wrong, because I was just a kid, but I kind of sensed a huge sort of urgency in the crowd. There was an electricity in the crowd that night because you guys were very much on top of the bluegrass world during this time in the 80s. I mean, Quicksilver was kind of ruling the world, and you had this massive change in personnel. So the band that I got to see was Russell Moore and Scott and Curtis Vestal. So I'm thinking this would have been 1985. And it just felt like, because weirdly, I didn't see the first set. I think I was just kind of running around being a kid at a festival, didn't really see it. But that night, my parents had reeled me in and I was in the crowd. And I could tell that the crowd was extremely interested and curious to hear this band. And man, when you guys walked down on stage, it was electric. And I just remember Scott Vestal's banjo playing did something to me that I've never recovered from since. So do you have a recollection of maybe what that era of Quicksilver was like that you want to talk about?
Sure. They came on board. That's probably one of the first festivals we worked at after we started to tour again. And I saw those fellows out in Texas. We played a gig in Tarkington, Texas, at a place called the Blue Barn, I believe it was. And they opened for us. And they were so good. And I could tell that they had been listening to our music. And now that was some time before, the change came, but I just kind of put it in the back of my head, just in case. Had no thought and no idea that it would come to pass, but it did. So we spent a couple of weeks or so of rehearsing, and Russell had been playing mandolin, Russell Moore had, and he became the guitar player. And but other than that, Curtis Vestal playing bass, and of course Scott. I remember Scott when he worked for a while with Larry Sparks, and I was impressed then. But Scott was then and still is one of the banjo players, and probably doesn't get the recognition that he deserves. He's so well versed. But anyway, that all came about the time that I had made a decision to go separate ways. And Scott called me, asked me if I would be willing to produce a album. And off the top of my head, I said, well, I got a better idea. Why don't you guys just come to work for me? And he said, really? I said, yeah, you and Curtis and Russell. and as it turned out, that's what happened. But, you know, we had those boys were young, I think 19, 20, and 21, Scott being 2 years older than Curtis. He was the youngest, and Russell right in between. I believe that's right. And obviously, they felt like they had some big shoes to fill, and they did. Mm-hmm. But they were hungry. They wanted to play, and they listened and rehearsed. And they were living in Asheville, North Carolina then. They come over to Bristol, where I live, and we'd rehearse every day, and I'd tell them what to work on for the next day. And when we hit the road, there was not one song on my records that we couldn't do. Plus, we had added some that we were going to do. And I did that to try and establish even more so their presence with me. And that's when I had Russell to sing Till the End. Mm-hmm. Scott had written Up on the Blue Ridge, but he called it something else. And I said, why don't you call it? I think he called it going back to Asheville or going to North. I don't remember what it was, but I just thought Up on the Blue Ridge was a nice title. And of course, it's his tune. Plus the fact that he did and still does just play the fire out of it, you know.
My goodness, that's an incredible specimen of banjo playing, because you have to put it in perspective. I steer people toward that recording all the time, and so you got to remember this was mid-'80s.
Yeah.
So what Scott is so special, I think one of maybe the best of all time at being able to play very outside the bluegrass box as well as tradition, and he still plays with the same authority and the drive that you expect from a tradition.
He does. And you know, and at that time we were playing it. We initially played it in the key of C.
No kidding.
Oh yes, yeah. It wasn't so hard for me, but fiddle players didn't really like it because then the bridge was could be a bear, you know. But when we recorded it, we actually had moved it by then into A. And quite honestly, it's even easier for me to play in A, or it was then. But anyway, you're right. Dahlonega, which was a great festival, by the way, and a great crowd, and they knew their music. But there was a lot of curiosity, people waiting, and to see what it was like. But I will say this: I only lost one date after I did make the change over the fact that there had been a split, and I was surprised that it could have been more. But the fact was that they were so ready when we hit the stage, and they may have been a little bit nervous, but you couldn't tell it, you know. And so when we hit the stage, not only doing all the stuff that I'd recorded and had been doing on my shows, and then we started doing other stuff, some new acapella things. And then when I let that big old boy from Texas step up and sing Till the End, that pretty well solidified the whole thing, you know.
Sure, he is fantastic. There's no doubt about it. And
he still is.
He absolutely is, absolutely. And obviously, we are very thankful for Russell here at our house. He's been a huge blessing to us for decades now. But I would like to pretend, you know, that my story is in any way unique, but it is not, because this leads us to a larger conversation. You know, that was my introduction to bluegrass, really. I'd grown up hearing it, but that was the first time I ever have a memory of seeing live bluegrass that I got excited about. Now, unfortunately, like, I never got to see the original band after I started playing, and I was about 13 when I got a banjo. Of course, that led the way to everybody, to Flatt and Scruggs, to Sonny Osborne and J.D. Crowe and Bill Emerson and all the people that are the banjo giants. It also led the way to Terry Balcom, because until I started playing the banjo, pretty much the only bluegrass I knew was your band. My parents would take me to see your band and then my grandfather who played the mandolin. So it was, I have no doubt in my mind that had it not been for your band, I would have never pursued the banjo. But that is not a unique story. who have that story. So I know that you try to be a humble guy, but let's just talk about a little bit about longevity and influence and how someone in your position, I think Quicksilver is this 40 or 41 years?
41.
41 years. So,
yes.
and that wasn't the start of your career. You actually began playing banjo with Jimmy Martin, correct?
1963.
In 1963. So, and then for anyone who doesn't know, correct me if I'm wrong, the trajectory was playing banjo with Jimmy Martin, and then going to work with J.D. Crowe. And then
I started playing guitar with I was actually playing banjo even then, but I went to visit J.D. We had a mutual friend who actually took banjo lessons from me. I lived in Louisville, Kentucky at the time. And J.D. lived in Lexington. Well, Harry Bickle was telling J.D. about me, and he said, well, tell him to come down, because I'll be honest, I didn't stay with Jimmy long enough to really establish any kind of a reputation. Not that I maybe could have, but I did a pretty good invitation to J.D. on a good day, you know. But so one day, it took probably a year or so, and I went down just to look him up, and I found him. He was playing a place called Martin's Tavern at 7th and Limestone Street in Lexington. I introduced myself, and we just hit it off, became friends. And so that night, he said, you want to pick one with us? I got to play guitar. I never had really, I played guitar, but it was always usually the banjo, or actually I played mandolin first, and then I learned to play banjo so I could get a job, because in those days, I wanted to go to Nashville when I got old enough, and or somewhere, and hook on with some of the big boys if I could. I looked at my options, and Monroe was a mandolin player. Jimmy had Paul Williams. Bobby Osmond was a mandolin player. Jesse McReynolds. I did a kind of, and Flat Scruggs had stopped carrying one pretty much, and so had Ralph and Carter. So I thought, well, if I learned to play banjo, maybe my options would be better. And that's really why the biggest reason I learned to play banjo. But so I sat in with playing guitar with Crowe that night. And if I wasn't doing a square dance or something on the weekends in Louisville, I'd go down and pick with JD, and then he called and asked me if I would fill in for his guitar player, who was laid up with, he was ill, going to be off for a while. He was ill with hepatitis or something. But anyway, that fill-in position lasted about 5.5 years.
I was going to say, it was a long fill-in, didn't it?
Well, I asked him one time after Eddie came back, and I was still there, and so we had 6 pieces in the band, and Lord, we were working those little clubs. They didn't pay anything anyway, and so I said, JD, Eddie's back. You want me to move on? What do you want? And he looked, and as only JD can do. Well, I thought you knew. That's the way I got hired,
Yeah, that's such a great story. And there's actually a quote I wanted to ask you about on the Walls of Time podcast. You talked about playing with Jimmy, and you said that the one mistake that you felt like Jimmy made, and I have interviewed so many great banjo players who played for Jimmy, and they all said it was a little tricky because he knew what he wanted musically, he had a very clear vision, but he had trouble articulating that. So it was like he had this idea that you just kind of had to reach in the air and grab for and pull out. But the quote I wanted to ask you about, and then shift that to you as band leader, is you said the biggest mistake you felt like he may have made is he wanted everybody to be J.D. Crowe. And obviously no other banjo player, and he had enormous banjo players, Alan Mundy and Bill Emerson and others.
Absolutely. Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. So you said it was, it's a mistake to expect anybody to replace the guy before them and be a carbon copy. Well, you have a tremendous experience with new configurations and making that work. So how do you always try to maintain your band sound, which is very, and it's identifiable, it's a signature sound that you've cultivated and I'm sure you protect. How do you balance that with getting the best out of someone new and not asking them to do kind of what you were saying that Jimmy had done with you on banjo?
Well, for me, the first thing I do is I try to put them at ease and make sure that they understand that they're not expected to be the person that was here prior to them. That all they are expected to do is to adapt, and try to conform to the style of music I play and what my expectations are. And I said, when I ask you to do something, I tell you that I want this because the reason I hired you is because I think you can do it. So I try to put them at ease with the fact that they're not expected to be the person was before. It's unfair to them. Then I look once that the music I'm playing now is well in hand, under control. Then I look and I find something for them that I can feature them on that is them. And if I hire a new fiddle player, if he plays a fiddle tune, if he says, "How do you want me to play it?" I say, "Play it the way you want to because it's your turn, your time. You play it." Or the banjo, whatever it may be. I don't expect them to play like the banjo player before. I don't expect them to be that, but they're the style, the identity I am protective of, because identity creates longevity. If you don't have identity, you won't have longevity. Absolutely. They got to know who you are, and not today, but next week and the year after or whatever. So so as long as we can maintain that, then I give him a little freedom to go along with that.
Sure. There's a lot of skills involved with being a band leader that I'm sure it can be overwhelming, but when you look at 41 years of a successful band, and a band is like any other, the industry as a whole, you'll have ebb and flows individually as a band, but certainly as like the 80s, the mid-'80s and late 80s, those were great years for bluegrass, weren't they? They were thriving years at festivals.
They were. And we had a lot of great festivals. We had probably one time, I didn't work them all, of course, but there was one time probably in the U.S. 400 festivals a year. So that kept me busy because I did a fair share of them. And of course, this was before the modern technology killed the merch sale, the hard copies and all that. So you combined your merch table with your flats, and it was a pretty good time. But unfortunately, we've got smart now, and as far as the merch part, that's been dead in the water, pretty much.
Yeah, let's talk about that too. As far as one thing that's required with longevity, we've already said that identity is a huge part of staying in the game as long as you have, but adaptability has got to be key. And I mean, if we traced your career, as we said, you started in '63 playing the banjo with Jimmy Martin, and then you played with JD, then you went to the Country Gentlemen, another extremely successful band. And then when you left the Gentlemen, it was to start Quicksilver. Am I right about all this?
You're right, yeah. Okay. So over the course of my career, which is soon to be 58 years pro, it's only been three groups other than my group, and that's not too bad. I was never one to hop around a lot, but You know, I want to mention the country gentleman. I went from J.D. Crowe. Well, I went from to Jimmy to J.D., which we had a lot of the same school, you know, the same education as far as having to work for Jimmy. And Jimmy, you're right. Jimmy had it was hard for him to articulate what he wanted. He knew what he wanted, but I found that after I had quit and gone away from Jimmy, that I began to understand more when I had time to get away and think about it without the pressure of, you know, I mean, first of all, you know, I was in awe of Jimmy Martin. You know, I mean, he was I firmly believe his records will stand with the best of them to this day. You know, and so I was pretty much to be able to stand in the middle of him and Paul Williams on stage was pretty awesome for an 18-year-old kid. You know,
Sure.
But it was hard for him to articulate. But anyway, I go to the country gentleman. I get a call from Bill Emerson, another Jimmy Martin alumni, a wonderful, great guy, and just one of those outstanding banjo stylists. And so he says, Goodrow's leaving. Do you want to come over and give a shot at it? I said, sure. So I go to Gettysburg, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Had a little bit of laryngitis, but I struggled through the audition. I think we sang for about an hour and a half. And I realized then that I need more songs than Charlie did.
Sure.
But I'd done a little homework. And I was a pretty quick studying lyric-wise. But anyway, they said, you know, we'd like for you to come aboard. And so I agreed to do that. But one thing I said, guys, let's be clear about this. You know, I'm from the South. I'm from Tennessee. I've got the Tennessee accent. And to come up, and I said, if you need another Duffy or Goodrow as far as the vocal timbre, I said, I'm not the guy you're looking for. And they said, no, you're exactly what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. And but what I did is I studied Charlie's vocals and the way they phrased. It was quite an undertaking for me because he phrased different. He had a little bit of a northern accent, and I had to. But you know what? That was part of the deal. Was they didn't change for me to make it work. I wanted to change for them and make sure that I was doing my part. And I did for almost 8 years. So
right, absolutely
worked out pretty good.
Yeah, the Live in Japan record is one of my. I can't tell you the number of hours I would play with that Live in Japan record from start to finish, and there were a lot of songs on it.
Yeah, there were. Yeah, we did that, and we actually recorded that. I think the first concert in Tokyo. Came off the stage at the concert, and Dick Freeland, who owned the Rebel at the time, said, "Congratulations." I said, "For what?" He said, "You just cut a live recording." I said, "Why didn't you tell us?" He said, "Well, if I had have, you guys would have been so tight, it wouldn't have been any good." You know, he was probably right.
I can see that. I mean, everybody would be a little more cautious. And
well, we were real. The first night we were excited. We had the adrenaline was out the roof, so it worked out pretty good. I went with them the first of September in 71. We went to Japan in January of 72.
So you were pretty new.
I was new. When they did that movie at Camp Springs in 71, I'd been with them a week.
How about that? I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just, it's a great record. It's a great documentation. And one thing that I've always seen, and I think Bill Emerson is good at this too, but the arranging, and you can always tell that every configuration you've been a part of, a lot of thought goes into arranging and a lot of precision. That's one of the things that I think really stands out about the original Quicksilver band, which I have never seen live. And it's one of those bands that, like I would love, obviously, if you could go back in time to see Flat and Scruggs, I would love to see all these different bands. one of those bands is the original Quicksilver band that I would really love to see, because I didn't get to do that. And the precision in the albums and in the live shows, just the, obviously this is pre-tuning, the vocals being so in tune, the arrangements being so well thought out, and the tightness and just attention to detail. I think it's pretty obvious when you look at your career as a whole that those are things very important to you, because you've never been a part of music that didn't show that you were paying attention to the smallest elements.
Well, when you do that, once you record, you have to live with it forever, or till the end of your life anyway. But I've always enjoyed, I always liked, I grew up in East Tennessee. My dad sang in an a cappella quartet. He sang lead in a quartet, and from the time I was about 7 or 8 years old, and still singing when I left home. And I used to watch them practice, and they all they could read shape note music, and they would work out their harmonies, and it just really intrigued me. So I guess I came by that from being around the quartet and watching them put their stuff together. And even though they weren't professional, wouldn't have if you would ask them to. They just loved to sing, and most of all, they believed in what they're singing about. But they were very, very detailed about those harmonies. Fact is, to the point when I got older and I started recording some of those songs, as far back as JD on the Model Church album, a lot of those songs came from my dad's repertoire, and then on to the Country Gentleman. When I'd carry him home and say, "Dad, what do you think about this one?" And he would look and listen. Well, it's pretty good, but that's not the way it was written.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, "Daddy, I can't read music. You know that." And I don't care. The writer wrote that, and he just, that was the one part he never got past. He said it's okay, but anyway.
He was a perfectionist.
He was a very, whatever he did, he was a perfectionist. Even in the cornfield, he was a perfectionist, and I guess that was instilled in me as a kid, about always wanting to try and wanting to do my best. I still do. The day I stop caring about it is the day that I'll just walk away, because I still care about it today. I love it. But anyway, the thing that JD and I had in common was the fact that we liked to step out and find songs that were not necessarily in the realm of what was bluegrass then. And then I go to the Country Gentleman, and Bill Emerson is like me. He loved, we thrived on arranging material. And Bill had an ear for a song. He could hear a hit in Winchester, Virginia, and we were living in Vienna, so but he had an incredible ear for a great song. And some of the most enjoyable times I had were with Bill and Charlie and Bill Yates.
Absolutely.
That was a lot of fun. We had fortunately and unfortunately, Bill left in 73 and did a career, a Navy career.
Right.
So
it was. You look at that band, and it's just that lineup is a really special group of musicians. And when you can find that, I just think it stands the test of time. And you listen to that band, and it really does. And it's one of those common threads that anybody can hear throughout your career. You have never been a part of music that was loose in any way. It's always been a very professional presentation of whatever you're doing.
Well, I've tried always to be that way. Again, I don't think that if you're just going out there to do it, to get it over with and collect the day's pay, music is more than that. The first reason, always for me, the first reason to play music is because I love music. That's why I do it first. And money is a necessity, obviously. But for the first reason anybody should get into this business is for the love of the music. And then take care of put your business hat on and try to take care of the money part.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that as well. When we talk about adaptability over you know, a career that's spanning nearly 60 years, you know, we have a really tough landscape right now in all music, bluegrass too, but you already touched on it. Merch sales used to be a huge part of our living, and
Yes.
it's just physical sales of product, as you well know, are just gone. So, you know, I'm not even sure what format would have been popular when you first started, but you've seen the transition probably between, like, you know, 8 tracks to vinyl to CDs to now streaming. So what words of wisdom maybe do you have for trying to just stay viable in today's current you know, situation that we find ourselves in? And then also maybe speak even a little bit broader about how you've always tried to adapt when formats change and trends change. You know, it's easy when you've been successful to think, well, I just want to stay the way that I am, but you've had to constantly reinvent business wise and musically, everything. So why don't you speak about that, especially the streaming age that we're in? How do you feel about it all?
Well, when I'll cover briefly, when I started touring with Jimmy, we would sell long play albums. And you could buy. We sold long play albums, and we would go out in the crowd at intermission, and we would hawk our albums and sold them for $2 a piece, and I got 20 cents of every one I sold. You know, so I could make my lunch money that way. Sure. Then of course the 8 tracks came. They came along, and so you had LPs and 8 tracks. I never owned an 8 track. I always hated them because we had one on the bus, and about the time you got into your favorite song, it would change tracks, and I hated that. But anyway, So the cassettes came along, and I thought, oh, great, you know, that's wonderful, you know. So still selling LPs and cassettes, and eventually the LPs were pretty much phased out. Then along about the time the CDs started to make their appearance, something happened that troubled me a lot. Was that they started making cassette players that you could make a duplicate of. Well, it didn't take a rocket science to me to know that that was a potential threat to you know, possible sales. I know the people that did that more than likely, most of them, I'd say 99% of the people that make copies like that weren't aware that it was illegal.
Sure.
They just weren't aware.
But people would say, I love your CD. I made a copy of it for all of my friends. They didn't know they were doing that.
Well, they would tell you that as a compliment, but not knowing that they were actually, it was illegal. And I would gently remind, I never got nasty with them. There's no point in that. Unless I knew it was that, and there were some times that I knew the people that were bootlegging. I've come down on them pretty hard, but yeah. So I saw the danger in being able to duplicate the cassettes. Well, the CDs came along, and we had a period of relief and a sense of relief because you couldn't copy those for a while. Then that happened. And so that was the beginning of what we're seeing today. I think up until then, we could kind of roll with it and figure out how to minimize the effect that it was having on our sales in the brick and mortar store or our merch tables or whatever. We could kind of handle it. But the streaming thing has been the most difficult. It still is. It's hard to figure it out. For the first, the big reason is it's all structured so that the artist and the writer gets virtually nothing, and that's not right. And the copyright laws are so out of date, and all these things. There's a lot that needs to be addressed. That unless you've got deep pockets, I don't know if we could ever correct it like it should be corrected. Now for the big people, maybe not so much, but we're still very much a minority music that we rely on every facet of the business that we can derive income from. We rely on that, and so we don't ride the tide quite as well as
Sure.
the bigger people who can offset it with other stuff. We just don't do that. One way that we found is we've tried to maybe kickstart the T-shirts and the caps and other little things, that,
Sure.
and you can only haul. I mean, showing a bike, getting a tractor trailer. I'm not going to do that, So you just have to look for outside ways to offset some of the losses that you're getting from the. I mean, usually it used to be I could take a date maybe for less than my flat price, and make money because I would do twice that in merch sales.
Sure. And some shows had reputations as being great for merch.
Oh, that's the ones you wanted on, yeah.
Yeah. And you
yeah.
can learn those and count on it, to a large degree.
Right.
I think the only remedy we have is as a lobby, the entire music industry as a whole, because from the consumer's perspective, for $10 a month, you can get all the music in the world that's ever been. And that's not going to go away. There's just this is whether we like it or not, it's what we have. And that's a tough pill to swallow. But at the same time, one of the things that I think has made it hardest, and give me your thoughts on this, people today, and I say this like even the baby of our band and the Grascals is John Bryan, and he's 29, I think. And I can even see it between his age group and mine, just 10 or 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
The level with which they consume media is just through the roof. It's amazing, but it also creates short memories. And I don't know, when I think about how avid of a Doyle Lawson fan I was when I was growing up, I wonder if that's harder to create these days because you have access to everything. So how do you combat that, or what are your thoughts on that as a band leader? Do you agree with that?
I think you're spot on, Kristin. I really do. It's everything now is people are so used to, I want that, I want it now. Well, with the technology, and when I'm talking about music and other stuff, if you see something that you like, whether it's the music or not, go to Amazon. It'd be here 1 day or 2 days. You got it.
You got it.
So now they'll come look at a hard copy of your CD. They don't want that. What they'll go is iTunes. They preview it, buy the 1 or 2 songs that they like, and then they're on to something else. So that's why I think established guys that have been around like me a long time, and even the Grascals who were pre-streaming, of course, we might say. But I think the younger groups will have a harder time with establishing a big fan base like we used to be able to do, and you can do it, but and once in a while, a group comes along, they have something a little different, and which has always been the case. Music goes in cycles, I know that, and but the new groups these days, I think it's a little harder to create that big wave, a big splash like we used to be able to do.
I agree with that, and there are certainly advantages to the accessibility with music. I mean, one of the most obvious advantages is we have, as any genre that isn't mainstream, we've always lacked access to to the radio, to radio stations, and the way people. But we've had like Sirius XM radio has been a huge blessing for us because
it has
given us an outlet for people to hear our music 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And the one good thing about, not one good thing, but a good thing about streaming is your music is a click away for someone. And it levels the playing ground in that no longer is accessibility an issue. But with that accessibility comes the obstacle of competing with everything.
Yes.
And that's that's a double-edged sword.
I think for me, I think one advantage for me as far as the streaming is I have about 40 plus CDs. So I do confess that I have a tremendous amount of streaming. I think
Absolutely.
due in no small part to that, and so
No
that's been for me an advantage. But again, we're going back to the current people that are trying to break in, and they've only got maybe one or two, or whatever. It's a lot harder. They don't see much at all in income from streaming, So,
right.
But you're right. It's here, and we just have to learn to cope with it and figure out how to get around it as best we can, and until something else comes along,
That's right. I think the digital age, we're never going back to physical product. I know there's a lot of nostalgia. I think it's one reason people are, doing vinyl again, just to try to create some sense of physical connection with an audience. And, another thing that I think it's really, and you can maybe speak to this too, if you look at the evolution of your average young musician these days, and you see how just incredible the level of musicianship just gets higher and higher at younger and younger ages. And that's the same thing with football players and sports, everything else. But, people now you could just, I don't know what it would be, but because everybody's speed would be different. But if I typed in YouTube, bluegrass mandolin players, I can find Chris Thiele and you and Sierra Hull and Paul Williams. There would just be a plethora of artists. And I think it's really affected how diverse musicians in our business are these days, and how they just all seem to be, I think they just grow up being able to hear it all. So obviously that has a huge impact on where, for me, when I started playing, even though we were, it was the CD age, I guess, Scott was the only banjo player I saw. I saw Little Roy Lewis and Scott Vestal for years. That was it.
Yeah.
Those were the only two banjo players I saw. So, I remember someone saying something about Bela Fleck, and I was 15. I'd been playing about 2 years. Had no idea. Well, then I got the Drive album, and that sends you down a whole new universe. Well,
absolutely, yeah.
Today, people immediately have access to all of those worlds, right?
Oh yeah, everything's at their touch, But you mentioned on the level of musicianship these days, it is totally phenomenal to me, and to see these young kids how they master their. And I don't say they play at it; they play it. But you go back to when I was a kid, there was no instructional videos, or you might.
Right.
I think Mel Bay had instruction how to play G, C, and D with two fingers or something like that. But now, and of course, as the years click by, the technology gets better, and the accessibility is better, but so is the level of talent. I love traditional bluegrass music. I've always considered myself a traditional player who was not afraid to step outside the box once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to understand that this is 2020, it will never, ever be like it was in 1950, 1960, 70, or whatever. Pick a year, because the kids today don't relate to that time. They relate to their time, you know. So I just hope that in the course of progress, that they won't lose the values of the tradition of the music, and not. I mean, I've never been afraid to step outside the box, but don't go so far that it becomes something else. And you say and think you're playing bluegrass when the reason we have different genres of music, because there's a certain sound that defines that even today, you know. And people might say, well, I don't like today's country. Well, maybe you don't, but it's today's country.
Yeah,
it's today, you know. So and then but thank goodness you've got people that even today, you've got the young people like Mo Pitney, who is steeped in tradition, and I just use him for an example, but yeah, there are other people. So, and you have in our music, you have some young groups that have come along in the very traditional vein, and Carolina Blue being one, and High Fidelity.
Sure.
And they're very much steeped in tradition, and that's a good thing. It kind of levels out the playing field between some of the music that's maybe way expanding way far outside, you know. Right. But you can't criticize those people.
No, sure.
You know, you don't want to do that, because you've got to accept the fact that they're playing the music that they have. Just as I did when I started, I wanted to play what I had in my head and my heart. So there's a fine line between all that, and we should be very mindful of that, and not you know, anything that doesn't grow. The only alternative to growth is death.
That's
and
right.
I don't want this music to die.
No, you said something, and it was so succinct, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it was, maybe you can remember what you said. It was something like, there's a fine line between preserving music and killing it.
Yes, there is. Yes. And you have to walk careful, because some of the best intentions can turn into the worst results.
Sure. Yeah, you know, a band that when I was, again, just started going to bluegrass shows, I remember the Johnson Mountain Boys were just on fire.
Oh, yes.
And they kind of were the rebirth. Like you guys, I always viewed you guys as very contemporary for the time. You guys were cutting edge. And then there was a band who was kind of just had such a youthful presentation of very traditional music.
Absolutely.
Loved it. I mean, the way they just, everything about it was with that intention. And it just goes to prove that I think there's always going to be that desire for the traditional side of things. And it's all perspective, where you're standing, because depending on what festival you're at, Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver could be one of the more contemporary acts, or, you know, the equivalent of like a bastion of tradition. I mean, where you're standing determines a lot of where they box you.
Well, I didn't have a blueprint when I decided to step away from the country gentleman. I didn't have it all mapped out. One thing, what I did say is, I don't want to be a one-dimensional band where that we're expected, if we step a little right or left, then that's not who we are. I said, if we want to do a contemporary song, let's do it. If we want to do hard drive, straight down the middle traditional, let's do it. If we want to get a little swinging Western swing, let's do it.
Sure.
But above all, I said, I want to have a quartet like my dad had. That was, and that's what we would sing all the way to the concerts. And if we had to go someplace else, we'd sing 2 or 3 hours after that.
Mhm.
And Barry Poss, who owned Sugar Hill Records, was at a show one night, and we were backstage singing. And he walked over and said, "Can I ask you something?" I said, "Yeah, what?" He said, "Is there ever a time that you all are not singing?" I said, "Not hardly. We did it all the time." And rehearsing, we rehearsed. And at one point in time, we would gather. We'd be in one room. And I borrowed this from, I heard Earl Scruggs talking about he and his brother walking around the house. And I got to thinking, if that will work for that, it would work for vocals. Mm-hmm. So one of us would stay in the room, and the other three would go different directions. And when we met back, if we weren't singing phrasing together or we weren't on pitch, we did it again.
That's amazing.
And that's what it does. It makes you be aware, and muscle memory, your phrasing comes together. And so I owe that little idea to Mr. Earl Scruggs.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great story that I've heard about Earl Scruggs too as well. And I didn't know you guys did that with your quartets, but I'm not surprised. Yeah. And so maybe talk just a little bit about that original band, such a special group of guys. And see, once I was able to buy the records and listen to them, then I discovered this original group that was just out of this world. And you had to have, they had to feel like kindred spirits, because you can't create something that unique and special unless everybody is like-minded in a lot of ways, I would think. So maybe talk about how you found them and how you knew that was going to be a good combination.
About a year or so before I left the gentleman, I had been thinking about it. I felt like that as much as I loved Charlie Walter and Bill, and it was never a problem of anything other than I felt like that I had just given all to that I had for that. Dick Freeland asked me to produce one half and one side of an album for a group called Southbound, and that group was Jimmy Haley and Lou Reed, and I think Doug Campbell was the bass player, and I don't remember who the banjo player was. Mm-hmm. No, Lou was the banjo player. I don't remember who the kid playing the mandolin. I forgot who he was, but anyway.
You didn't need to keep up with the mandolin players.
I wasn't too concerned about that. Anyway, so and I did, and I think I did one half, and Eddie Adcock did the other side. So when I decided that I was going to break away, the first thing I thought of, I knew I wanted to have a strong rhythm guitar player. And Jimmy Haley was the first guy I thought of. And I tracked him down. He was in Greenville, South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And I called him. And to be honest with you, one phone call, and I got all three of them with one phone call. Because I asked about Lou, and Lou was, I think at that time, had kind of gotten away from, he was still around Greenville, but he wasn't actually picking with him. But he said, "Yeah, I'll ask him." And I said, "Well, you know any good banjo players hanging around?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Terry Balkin's been picking some with us, and he's up in Monroe." And so that's how the three of us got together. And I was living in Keysville, Virginia at the time, just south of Farmville, Virginia. Mm-hmm. Little town. I loved living, a small place. It was a great place to live. Anyway, they came up, we picked and decided. I really didn't feel that magic at the first time. I don't think any of us did. We decided we'd get together again. And the second rehearsal, it clicked. It just, I felt it. And so.
What do you think happened? What happened and why did it happen then and not right off the bat?
I think one of the things I expressed was that I wanted to play on the as we call it, the front edge of the beat. Mm-hmm. I always thought that playing on the front edge creates some excitement, and it really does. But anyway, but the bottom line is that those three guys, they got what I was looking for. They understood, and so it really became a concentrated effort. And I would never ever take any credit away from those guys, because they were part of the sound that was created for Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver. And but they understood, and they understood what I wanted, and then everything just kind of fed off of the other, and it was just it was fun. We officially became a band and recorded in August of that year, and I called Barry Poss. I didn't want to stay with Rebel. I was with a Country Gentleman, and I left the Country Gentleman, and like I said, I want to leave like I came. That's his friends, and anything I thought might have been detrimental to what they were doing, I didn't want to do anything like that. So they were still Rebel, and so I called Barry Poss, who had Sugar Hill Records was just really young then. I think they had Buck White, and maybe he'd done one for Ricky Skaggs. That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, "Well, yeah, send me something." Well, we did a couple of songs, and I sent them to him on the cassette.
Sure.
As soon as he got him, picked up the phone, and he said, "This is Barry. When do you want to go to the studio?" So that's kind of how we came to be with Sugar Hill. Mm-hmm. And so the first couple of albums we did, Barry was there. Mm-hmm. And then on the third one, and then the fourth one, he didn't show up. And I asked him, I said, "Do you not like my music anymore?" He said, "No, there's no point in me being there. Right. I'm in the way. You know what you want. You don't waste time. You guys get it done. There's no point in me being there." So sure. That made me feel good. He had a vote of confidence in what we were doing.
Definitely. And, I really think it doesn't hurt to reiterate to people that if you listen to those albums, they hold up to today's standards. And this is not, it's easy for people to forget these days. These vocals are not tuned. This is not where you just cut to a click and you edit and you pull tracks and you mess up here, so you comp in here. You guys were really doing that. That was how you sounded. And that level of performance without the help of technology is an entirely different standard. It's so different.
It was, yeah. And I will tell you that today's technology makes it easier to make a recording.
It's faster.
But I remember when, you didn't go in not prepared. Mm-hmm. When we signed with Vanguard Records with the Country Gentleman, we went to Vanguard Records because they had Doc Watson and John Baez, a bunch of people, So we figured they knew a little bit about acoustic music. So we go up to do the first album, and we had a young Ricky Skaggs playing fiddle. Took Mike Aldridge along as a dobro, and because he and Emerson had worked together before. We go up and we start recording on Monday, and on Thursday at about, I guess, 2:00 or so, we go up to Mr. Solomon's office in Vanguard. Mm-hmm. And there was two brothers. Maynard was the guy that you always saw. I can't remember the other. He was never around. But mm-hmm. So we go in. He said, "Oh, you guys, what are you up to?" So we said, "We're finished." He said, "Oh, so you're done for the day?" Emerson said, "No, we're done with the recording." He said, "You're what?" We said, "We finished the recording. Just had to come back and mix it." And he said, "No, wait a minute. You're finished with the recording?" I said, "Yeah." "How many songs you do?" I said, 12. And he said, "God." So he mentioned one of his artists. He said, "I've had him in here for 2 years trying to get a single out of him."
Wow. Sure.
So that was the difference, because for us, again, for us, time was money,
Definitely.
That's it. And as soon as we could do it and do it right, of course, we didn't leave it halfway.
Sure.
But the key was you were prepared when you went to the studio.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, one thing that I think is, it's kind of been one of the themes of this conversation is that things change.
Oh,
And
yeah.
each of these changes, there are positives and there are negatives. And you talked about phrasing and walking around and then coming back together to check phrasing. And now, even that is just so easy to achieve. Van Atkins as
Yeah.
well as I do, at Mountain Home. And man, he is a magic maker. He's a music maker. I mean, he's a great engineer, and it's just amazing what we can do. And it does save time, and it really gives us a lot of advantages that we can all benefit from. But there is something to be said when you listen to music, and it's something I stress to students, is you do need to put it into context. Up on the Blue Ridge, Scott's cut of that was magnificent, is magnificent today. I mean, I know it note for note, and I can't play it like that. No matter how long I play it, I'm never going to be able to play like that. And he was doing that in 1985, I guess.
85, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important for all of us to have a general understanding and frame music from the time it's from, and it just makes all of your accomplishments even that much more special. So as we get ready to close here, I have a couple of remaining questions. The few people that I was able to tell that I was going to be lucky enough to have this time with you, several of them said, asking this one question that I'll get to, and then let's talk about the theme for IBMA this year as a whole. So the question that everyone asked me to see what you would say is, what do you look for in a band member when you're getting ready to hire somebody? What is it that makes this guy attractive to you? What are the traits you're looking for?
Well, the first thing I look for is obviously when you hear, if you're interested enough in a person to start a conversation, obviously you think he has potential. Mm-hmm. And so I listen to him and say, yeah. And one thing, when people come here, they don't know what they're going to be doing in terms of vocally. Mm-hmm. I look for people and I ask them, do you know harmony? Can you sing harmony? And because sometimes my tenor singer may be doing baritone, somebody else doing tenor, whatever. But I look at that part of it, and I really pay attention to character. I want somebody that will be here that will represent me and my group and our world of bluegrass in a highly professional manner. That they don't have people saying, "Oh boy, I saw so and so, and boy, you should have seen what he was doing, or how he was acting." Or I don't need that. I don't want that. And so I look at their character. There's a few rules I lay out that they need to follow, but I just look for. The first thing I ask them. Are you willing to take direction? Musicians, we have a lot of idiosyncrasies because I am a musician. I know we can be a little finicky sometimes, Sure. So I need to get that up front. Okay, if you don't want to take directions, then you probably don't want to come here. Because I have an idea in my head. I said, when I ask you to do something, it's because I know that you can do it. Mm-hmm. And another thing I tell them is, can't. I can't is not a thing that we use here. Mm-hmm. We don't use that word. Mm-hmm. And they give me 100%. I'm going to be the easiest guy they've ever worked for.
That's great. That's a great model. And it's one that's encouraging and clear. So many times if people just know the expectations, they'll rise to them. Going back to the front of the conversation, there was no one playing for Jimmy Martin who didn't want to give him what he wanted. It was a miscommunication some of the time. So if you can be clear with people, they're probably there to please. They want to please. So you get to two people together with that mentality, and and great things can happen. Well, the final thing, the entire theme for this year is, this is the 75th birthday for bluegrass music. So they're looking at the last 75 years and then and beyond. So this is a very broad, but it's a general question, and it may be hard to answer, but I think there's value. I think we can really benefit from asking people who have spent a lifetime in our music, what does bluegrass mean to you now? It means different things to us as we age. What, as you look back and you're still thriving, you're still extremely relevant in today's music scene, but you have the vantage point that few have. What does the music mean to you when you look back and when you look forward? What is bluegrass for you right now?
That's really easy to answer. Bluegrass today means just as much to me as it did when I was about 5 years old, and my mother told me who that was, Bill Monroe on the Grand Ole Opry, when I asked her. And then when I met Jimmy Martin at 14, I already knew that I wanted to play music. Then my dream was realized when I was 18. And I love the music. I love bluegrass. I still, I know I do what I do, but I still go periodically. And I give myself a healthy dose of the Monroe and the Flat Scruggs, the Pioneers. And I don't want to leave anybody out, but they were all important because they were giving us a big road to follow, and each in their own way playing the same music with their own interpretation. And that's what it made it so great. You didn't have to wonder who Reno and Smiley were. You didn't have to wonder who Ralph and Carter were, or Bobby and Sonny. They all said, yeah, and the Flat Scruggs. So, but this is how. What do you think about what we're doing? Well, to me today, for instance, my Live in Prague CD, that's been awfully good to me, and we had the good fortune of generating 5 or 6 nominations for the IBMA. Whether or not we win any ones is really beside the point. The fact is that after 41 years as a band leader, and I've had a lot of accolades come along that I'm very proud of. But to be around as long as I have and still have people to show their appreciation for something that I'm still doing makes me know that I'm still trying. I'm just not marking time and just to get it out of the way. I'm still excited about it. The fact is, right now I can't wait to get to the studio because we've been doing a lot of interesting things within the band. And so my philosophy is, I want to wear out. I don't want to rust out.
There you go. No sense of complacency at all. You're just as, you just have the same sense of vibrancy that you started with. And that's amazing to maintain that all these years. And it's so evident in your success and in the way that you've remained really and truly at the top of your field this whole time. I mean, it's really unparalleled. I believe that
You're very kind. Thank you.
And it's a testament to loving the music, because we can't, as human beings, we're just not strong enough to persevere for that long unless the love is real, and unless it truly is a passion. It has to mean more than any type of trivial pursuit that we may take on. It has to be personal and passionate and real and alive, or you'll just stay at home eventually, because there's
Well, you've got to realize that for every mountaintop that you peak, there's also that low valley you're going to go through. You can look for it, because it's going to happen.
Count on it, right?
We don't live in a perfect world, but the fact is that God instilled in me this love and this never-ending thirst for the music, and I think about it all the time. It's all, Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Well, I hope this will mean something to you because it is the truth, and I think you'll relate to it. I'm certain that were it not for your band, I would have never found the banjo. I would have never really found bluegrass, which as a consequence means I never find my husband. And
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
Who by the way, I've threatened to break his fingers too. He's so good.
Yes, he did. But it really, when bluegrass means as much to you as it does to us, without even intentionally doing it, you end up shaping your whole life around it to enable it. And it's not about what you do for a living, it's your way of life.
It
and,
is.
And
Yeah.
I think that it just means the world for me to get to spend this time with you and let you know that the impact, though I'm not unique in this, that the impact is so real and personal for your career and what it's meant to me in my life. And to this day, when I'm driving back from Nashville in the middle of the night and I'm so sleepy and the sun's coming up and I'm thinking, I got to get home. If I listen to 80s, that initial band that I saw when I was a kid, I can get home no matter how tired I am listening to that.
Oh.
But you know what? That means something. There's something real about that it's what you said. The spark is still there. I get excited. I start speeding. It's still, it impacts me to this day.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Kristin. Thank you. And I might say that you have made bluegrass very proud when it comes to banjo picking. I really mean that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. And we just really appreciate your time today. I know this is a busy week for you. So thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for everything you've done for our music and you continue to do.
Thank you, Kristin.
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.